Section 77 of Great Events in the History of North and South America. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Mario Pineda. Great Events in the History of North and South America by Charles Goodrich. South America, Buenos Ayres or Provinces of La Plata. Name, etc. This country received its name at first from the name of its great river, La Plata. The river was so denominated from the fact that, among the spoils of a few Indians inhumanly put to death, some ornaments of gold and silver had been found. In 1778, it was erected into a Spanish viceroyalty by the name of the Viceroyalty of Rio de la Plata. On its declaration of independence in 1816, it assumed the name of the United Provinces of La Plata, and in 1826 that of the Argentine Republic, and it has also long been known by the name of Buenos Ayres from the name of its chief city. Inhabitants or classes of people. These are the same as are found in Chile, namely European Spaniards, Creoles, Negroes, Indians, and the mixed races. The Chiquintos are a numerous and civilized nation of independent Indians. There are also many other tribes. There is a striking sameness in the character of all the South American states. Among the Creoles, the strictest equality obtains. No white would do service for anyone of his own nation. Education, perhaps in all the classes, is rather neglected. Discovery and settlement. Sebastian Cabot, in the early part of the 16th century, sailed up the river, to which he gave the name of La Plata. In attempting to build a fortress in the country, or otherwise to commence a settlement, he met with so much opposition from the inhabitants that in 1530 he returned to Spain in order to obtain recruits. The few men whom he left in the colony were either massacred or abandoned the country. Some more considerable forces, led by Mendoza, came and settled on the river in 1535 and laid the foundation of Buenos Ayres. Their condition, however, was precarious, whether there or wherever else they located themselves in the country. They were in danger of being cut off either by famine or Indian hostilities. Buenos Ayres was at length abandoned and settlements made farther up the river. To propitiate the natives, they finally resorted to the policy of marrying their women. From a union of this kind sprung the race of mestizos, which, in the course of time, became so common in South America. Buenos Ayres was rebuilt in 1580, and from that time, some of the petty nations in that vicinity submitted to the Spanish yoke. A degree of civilization and order was effected among these savage people by the Jesuits through a long course of years. First insurrection against the government of Spain. The desire of throwing off the government of the mother country was manifested at an early period among the inhabitants of the city of Buenos Ayres. The development of this feeling was somewhat earlier there than in other parts of Spanish America. It owed its origin to the war which existed between Spain and Great Britain in 1806. As the consequence of this war, the province of La Plata was neglected and thus presented a strong temptation for invasion on the part of the British. That which might have been attempted at some subsequent period by public authority was commenced by private aggressions, or certainly without orders from the government. A fleet and army under Commodore Topham and General Beresford, after effecting the conquest of the Cape of Good Hope, proceeded to Buenos Ayres on the 8th of June 1806, and, after slight resistance, took possession of the place on the 28th of June. The Spaniards, however, under Liniers, a French officer, collecting a large force in the country, retook it within 16 days, with a good deal of loss to the British. The latter, having received reinforcements, made two several attempts to recover possession of the city, but failed in both. In the embarrassments occasioned by Napoleon's invasion of Spain, parties sprang up in Buenos Ayres, some supporting Liniers, who had been appointed viceroy of the province, and others the Spanish authority. The latter appeared, for a time, to be the prevailing power, But the ebullition of royalty which had proclaimed Ferdinand was of short duration. The Spanish Americans began to feel that they had power in their hands, as was manifested in their defeat of the British. Their discontents increased at the tyranny exercised over them. Commotion followed commotion till in May 1810 the Viceroy, Cisneros, finding his embarrassments and perplexities greatly increased by the disasters of the Spaniards at home, was compelled to announce his inability to manage the government. By the request of the municipality of the city, he called the Congress, which established a provisional junta for the government of the country. The 25th of May, the date of this government, has ever since been observed as the anniversary of independence in Buenos Aires. Progress and changes of the new government. On the part of Spain, attempts were made to recover her lost power, and the difficulties and dissensions so universally experienced by the American colonies on such occasions were felt in a considerable degree in Buenos Aires. In 1811, a Congress assembled in the city of Buenos Aires and placed the executive power in the hands of a triumvirate. In 1812, Posadas was appointed Supreme Director of the Republic with a council of 7. In 1816, a Congress assembled at Tucumán declared the country's only La Plata independent and named Pueyrredón director. Having transferred its sessions to Buenos Aires, it assumed the title of the United Provinces of South America. In 1819, a Congress assembled at Buenos Aires formed a constitution modeled on that of the United States, and Rondó was elected Supreme Director, and Rivadavia was placed at the head of foreign affairs. For some time, the principal functions of the government were discharged by a constituent Congress, the executive power being entrusted to the provincial government of Buenos Aires. In February 1826, Rivadavia was elected president. The Republic became involved in war with Brazil on account of Banda Oriental, which was first added to Brazil and afterwards declared, August 1828, independent. Rivadavia had been resigned, the Congress was dissolved, each of the provinces became again independent, and Dorrego was chosen governor of the province of Buenos Aires. General Lavalle, at the head of the Unitarios, caused Dorrego to be shot and himself to be proclaimed president, December 1st, 1828. A bloody civil war ensued, and in August 1829 Lavalle was compelled to resign, and his successor was General Juan José Villamont, who was succeeded December 8, 1829, by General Juan Manuel de Rosas, who was declared dictator August 9, 1830. But before the end of the year, General Quiroga made himself dictator or governor. In 1835, de Rosas was made governor of Buenos Aires for 5 years, and, in addition to his other duties, he was charged with the foreign relations of the Argentine Republic. As early as the year 1822, the independence of the United Provinces of La Plata was acknowledged by the Congress of the United States, and a treaty of commerce was concluded with Great Britain in 1825. Domestic troubles, however, were again renewed, the union of the provinces was dissolved, and separate governments were established. But the difficulties did not soon come to a close, as two fiercely contending parties, of opposite views respecting the forms of government, created no small amount of turbulence and misrule. On December 29, 1839, a battle was fought at Cagancha between General Echagne, governor of the Buenos Aires province of Entre Rios, and General Fructuoso Rivera, president of the Oriental Republic of Uruguay. The former had an army of 5,000 men and was defeated with a loss stated at 800 killed and a considerable number of prisoners, together with the loss of their baggage and horses. The loss of General Rivera in killed and wounded was stated at about 200. Present condition of the government. The government of this country for many years past has been in the hands of Don Juan M. de Rosas. According to the latest advices, Rosas is in trouble with the new British minister, Mr. Sutton. It is stated that the former refused to receive Mr. Sutton unless he was authorized to treat with Rosas on the basis laid down by Mr. Hood, the first special minister that was sent out by England. Mr. Southern refuses to submit to that condition, and thus the affair remains at present. End of section 77. Section 78 of Great Events in the History of North and South America. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Mario Pineda. Great Events in the History of North and South America by Charles Goodrich. South America, Oriental Republic or Uruguay. Locality, extent, etc. This country lies north of the Rio de la Plata, east of the river Uruguay, and south of Brazil. It has an area of 80,000 miles. Montevideo is the capital of the republic and is a town of some importance. Uruguay comprises 9 departments. Name and history. This country constituted a part of the Viceroyalty, afterwards the Republic of La Plata, and was known by the name of Banda Oriental, Eastern Frontier, from its geographical position. After the declaration of the independence of the United Provinces, it became the subject of an obstinate war between the new republic and the Empire of Brazil. Elio, who was appointed by the Regency of Spain Captain General of the province of Rio de la Plata, in that capacity also governed the province of Montevideo or the Banda Oriental. He was now the most dangerous and powerful enemy with which the government of Buenos Ayres were at war. That government, having received an ally, but the desertion of Artigas, a captain in the royal service, employed him in conjunction with General Rondeau in an expedition against Banda Oriental. In May 1811, they obtained a signal victory at Las Piedras over the royalists and laid siege to Montevideo. In this extremity, Elio, finding himself unable to hold out long without assistance, applied to the Portuguese of Brazil, who sent him an army of 4,000 men and a subsidy of monies. Before any important operations could be engaged in, however, a treaty was concluded between Montevideo and Buenos Ayres in November 1811, by virtue of which the siege of Montevideo was to be raised and the Portuguese forces were to return home. In pursuance of the treaty, the siege was raised, but the Portuguese proved faithless and began to ravage the territory of La Plata. Danger now encompassed the Buenos Ayreans not only from the Portuguese, but from the royalists of Peru. They, however, induced the latter to withdraw their troops, and the royalists they defeated in battle, but nothing could restore quiet to the country, and hostilities were again commenced with Montevideo. The war was carried on with various success, and what, with this calamity and rival factions which infested the city, little tranquillity was enjoyed till articles of agreement between the Brazilians and Buenos Ayreans were signed at Rio de Janeiro, August 27, 1828. Then was effected the independence of the country, which took the title of the Republic of Montevideo, so named from its capital, but it has since assumed the title of the Oriental Republic of Uruguay. A constitution was adopted in 1830, according to which the legislative power is vested in 2 bodies, a Senate of 9 members and a House of Representatives of 29 members, and the Code of Napoleon was established as the law of the country. End of section 78. Section 79 of Great Events in the History of North and South America. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Mario Pineda. Great Events in the History of North and South America by Charles Goodrich. South America, Brazil. Situation, extent, etc. Brazil is an extensive country occupying the eastern and central portion of South America from 4 degrees north to 33 degrees south and from 35 degrees to 73 degrees west longitude. It has an area of 3 million square miles. This region is traversed by several distinct chains of mountains, chiefly in the eastern and northern provinces, but they do not any of them reach to any great elevation. The mighty Orellana or the Amazon gives a character to the country, as it is the largest river in the world, both in regard to the length of its course and to its volume of water, draining an area of more than 2 million square miles and furnishing the country with the amplest means of intercommunication. The greater part of Brazil is constituted of an immense immeasurable plain, through which flow innumerable streams, on which stand boundless and impenetrable forests, and the whole of which swarms with animal life in all its forms, ferocious beasts of prey, huge serpents, alligators, troops of monkeys, flocks of gaudily colored and loquacious birds, and clouds of insects, are yet undisturbed by the arts of man. A great variety exists as to the climate. Intense heat prevails under the equator, but rendered supportable by the excessive humidity of the atmosphere and the copious dews. Mild and temperate, with occasionally cold weather, is experienced in the southern portions. The soil is very fertile in a large portion of the country and produces an immense variety of rich and valuable plants and vegetables, many of them being peculiar to this region. The forests are admirable for their beauty and grandeur, the growth of trees being gigantic and the number of ornamental ones surpassing calculation. An important article of export are several kinds of what is called Brazil wood, not to speak of timber for shipbuilding, mahogany, and an infinity of dyeing woods. The golds and diamonds of Brazil are far famed, the quantity of gold annually obtained being estimated at $5 millions. Brazil has more foreign commerce than any other country in America except the United States. Its principal ports are Rio de Janeiro, Bahia or San Salvador, Pernambuco, Pará, San Luis de Maranham, and San Pedro. Discovery and settlement. The discovery of Brazil by the Portuguese was a matter of accident. It occurred in the year 1500 as Pedro Álvares Cabral was sailing from Lisbon with a fleet for the East Indies. Standing out a great distance to the west in order to avoid the calms on the coast of Africa, he saw land on the 24th of April in latitude 17 south, and on the 3rd of May landed at a harbor which was named Porto Seguro. The country was named Brazil, eventually from the circumstance that the forest abounded with trees producing a beautiful dyewood of a fiery red, to which the Portuguese gave the name of Brazil, from brasa, a live coal. Cabral, having taken possession of the country in the name of his sovereign, the King of Portugal, dispatched a vessel to Lisbon to announce his important discovery, while he himself proceeded on his voyage to India. The king, gratified with the foregoing announcement, immediately fitted out an expedition under Amerigo Vespucci, consisting of 3 ships, which sailed in 1501. Vespucci explored the country as far south as the 52nd degree of latitude, but formed no settlement. After a voyage of 16 months, he returned to Lisbon. 2 years later, 1503, he made a second voyage, in which he had the misfortune to lose all his fleet, with the exception of his own ship. During this visit, he established a settlement on the coast, and carried home a cargo of Brazil wood, the value of which was so great as to induce many adventurers to embark for that country. These volunteer colonists, composed of various grades and conditions in the social scale, but all imbued with the spirit of enterprise, formed a settlement at San Salvador. The settlement, which had been made on the coast in 1503 under Vespucci, received but little attention until certain French adventurers, about half a century afterwards, attempted to settle a colony at Rio de Janeiro. A Portuguese force finally expelled the French from their position after a struggle of 2 years, in 1567, the French having continued in different parts of the country from 1558 till that time. Owing to various circumstances, the Portuguese court, from making this region a place of exile and confinement for convicts and the unhappy victims of the Inquisition, was led to regard it at length as a place of some importance. The sugar cane began to be cultivated, and the new luxury of sugar was sought with avidity. In connection with this, A governor was sent out to manage the affairs of the settlers, and he built the city of San Salvador, which became the center of the colony. The Jesuits, however, were the most efficient class in building up the colony and conciliating the affections of the natives. As misfortunes during the latter part of the 16th century befell the Portuguese in Europe, advantage was taken of their weakness, and their Brazilian possessions were invaded and taken by the Dutch. But they were not suffered to hold their conquest without molestation. In 1626, San Salvador was retaken by the Portuguese. The Dutch, however, retained their power for a number of years in the country and added to their conquests till they were expelled in 1654 by a superior Portuguese force sent against them. In 1661, the sole possession of Brazil was secured to Portugal by treaty in consideration of the sum of $1,700,000, which that crown engaged to pay to the United Colonies. Policy of the Portuguese government in the latter part of the 18th century. The measures adopted by the government in respect to Brazil were narrow and illiberal. Their effect was to discourage industry and to fetter commerce. On the latter, restrictions and monopolies were imposed. The search for gold and diamonds engrossed the attention of the government. Foreigners could either gain no admission into the country or were jealously watched. Trade was carried on only at the fortified posts. This disastrous state of things continued till the beginning of the present century, when an event took place which changed the whole aspect of affairs in this country. Removal of the Portuguese court to Brazil. The event above referred to was the removal of the court in the mother country to this, its American colony. The design of effecting such a change was entertained many years before it took place. As early as 1761, the measure had been determined on, and preparations were made, but it was not until 1808 that the project was put into execution. The occasion was the declaration of war by Bonaparte against Portugal. The regent, who, after the death of his mother in 1816, became King of Portugal by the title of John VI, with the royal family, left Europe for Brazil, where they arrived January 22, 1808. This event resulted in great advantage to the Brazilians. Soon the all-exclusive system of trade was abolished, and all the ports of the country were open to the commerce of the world. The free exercise of industry was permitted to all classes of people, and the press, which for 3 centuries had been prohibited, was immediately established. After the fall of Napoleon, John raised Brazil to the rank of a kingdom in 1815, thenceforth to be called the Kingdom of Brazil, which, with the European territories, should constitute the United Kingdoms of Portugal, Algarves, and Brazil. In 1821, John returned to Portugal, leaving his son, Pedro, in Brazil as Prince Regent. On the 12th of October 1822, Brazil was declared independent, as there had been, for some time, a manifest and growing desire on the part of the people for this change. At the same time, the Prince Pedro was crowned Emperor of Brazil. On the death of John VI in 1826, Pedro declared his daughter Maria Queen of Portugal. And on the 6th of April 1831, he abdicated the throne of Brazil in favor of his son Pedro II, born October 2, 1825, and who is now emperor. Constitutional government. According to the Constitution, which was formed in 1823 and adopted in 1824, Brazil is a hereditary monarchy with a legislative assembly consisting of 2 houses, a Senate appointed by the emperor, and a House of Representatives elected by the people. The Catholic faith is the religion of the state, but all other Christians are tolerated, though not allowed to build churches or perform divine service in public. End of section 79. Section 80 of Great Events in the History of North and South America. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Mario Pineda. Great Events in the History of North and South America by Charles Goodrich. South America, Paraguay. Situation, extent, etc. This republic is situated between the rivers Paraguay and Paraná, having the Empire of Brazil on the east and the Argentine Republic on the west. It has an area of 90,000 square miles. Its divisions consist of 8 departments. This country is considered the fairest portion of what was once the United Provinces. Its climate is mild and balmy. The surface is not mountainous, neither is it a dead level. It is well supplied with a great variety of streams of pure water. Its soil is everywhere found to be exceedingly productive and was originally covered with immense forests of stately timber. Among its more ample productions are grain, cotton, sugar, and excellent fruits, oranges, figs, the olive, and the grape, as well as the singular vegetable called mate, so extensively used in South America as a tea or beverage. Insurrections and attempts at revolution in the early part of the 18th century. Paraguay is rendered remarkable by several projects more than a century ago having in view its independence and, what is more wonderful, by the open and public assertion at that time of the principle that the authority of the people was greater than that of the king himself. Thus was anticipated in a colony of the most bigoted and despotic court of Europe more than 100 years ago the modern liberal doctrine of the sovereignty of the people. The attempts referred to were made by individuals who had perhaps their private causes of grievance, as Antequera, Mompo, and Mena, though one of them, certainly Mompo, was the preacher of the doctrine above stated. No real independence, however, was effected, except for a short period. The revolutionary leaders were soon overcome in battle, put to death, or banished, and the authority of the King of Spain was re-established and continued for the greater part of a century. Establishment of independence and a despotic government. In 1810, the Junta of Buenos Ayres sent a body of troops to Paraguay to depose the Spanish governor, but they were compelled to retreat. The inhabitants, however, themselves deposed the governor and took the government into their own hands. In 1813, they proclaimed Paraguay a republic under 2 consuls, the principal of which was Dr. José Gaspar Rodriguez de Francia. At the end of the year, Francia caused himself to be named dictator for 3 years, and, at the close of this term, for life. On the 24th of September 1826, a formal declaration of independence was made, though the country, for 14 or 15 years, had been governed independently of Spain. The administration of Dr. Francia proved to be an absolute and perfect despotism, and that of a most severe and sanguinary character. He was a native of Paraguay and received the degree of Doctor of Theology at the University of Cordova in Tucumán. For nearly 30 years he acted the tyrant over the inhabitants of the country and brought the entire mass into the most unresisting subserviency to his will. No personage has figured so conspicuously as Dr. Francia in the modern history of South America. When, by consummate address, he had succeeded in getting himself appointed dictator for life, commenced one of the most extraordinary events on record. From the moment when he found his footing firm and his authority quietly submitted to, his whole character appeared to undergo a sudden change. Without faltering or hesitation, without a pause of human weakness or the thrill of human feeling, he proceeded to frame the most extraordinary despotism that the world has ever seen. He reduced all the population of Paraguay to 2 classes, of which the dictator constituted one and his subjects the other. In the dictator was lodged the whole power, legislative and executive. The people had no power, no privileges, no rights, and only one duty: to obey. All was performed rapidly, boldly, and decisively. He knew the character of the weak and ignorant people at whose head he had placed himself, and who had the temerity to presume that they had energy and virtue sufficient to form a republic. The inhabitants of Paraguay delivered themselves up, bound hand and foot, into the hands of an absolute and ferocious despot, who reduced them to absolute slavery, ruined their commerce and agriculture, shut them up from the rest of the world, and dragged to the prison or the scaffold every man in the country whose talents, wealth, or knowledge opposed any obstacle in the way of his tyranny. No human being was allowed to leave the country or dispatch a letter abroad. A few only escaped by means of the flooding of the country by the rise of the river Paraguay, and from these individuals the world has learned respecting the secrets of this more than Dionysian espionage and tyranny. No attempted conspiracies availed to secure his person or destroy his life. He managed so as to gain over his soldiers entirely to his interests. As was to be expected, he lived in constant fear of assassination or poisoning, ordering his guards sometimes to shoot those who dared to look at his house in passing along the streets, and taking the trouble to cook his own victuals. He died at about the age of 80 in 1842, having thus enacted the despot during the long course of 28 years. The wonder of all is that the people generally were contented and happy under this strict and unnatural regime, yet it is partly to be accounted for from the entire security of person and property which was felt, so far as the intercourse of the people among themselves was concerned. Each district was made responsible for every theft committed in it. All the inhabitants, Indians as well as Creoles, were taught to read, write, and keep accounts. Public schools were everywhere established, and children were required to attend them until, in the judgment of the municipal authority, they were sufficiently instructed. The dictator also established lyceums and other liberal institutions. Every person was required to labor, and mendicity was prohibited. It has been represented, however, that there was a mitigation of the doctor's despotism in the latter part of his life. According to the more recent accounts, the government of this country was administered by 5 consuls, but these and the other matters pertaining to Paraguay are very imperfectly known, as the country has, for so long a period, been avoided by foreigners. End of section 80.
Section 81 of Great Events in the History of North and South America. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Piotr Natter. Great Events in the History of North and South America by Charles Goodrich. West Indies. Situation, extent, climate, productions, etc. The West Indies constitute the great archipelago of the western continent, extending from latitude 10 to 28 degrees north, between the coast of Florida on the north and the mouth of the river Orinoco in South America. They are a large cluster of islands, in their several portions variously denominated, according to their situations or other peculiarities, but will here be considered in their political divisions. The land area of the whole group is over 93,000 square miles. These islands have a general sameness of character in some respects, from the position which they occupy on the face of the globe. The climate, as is to be expected, is generally very warm, though moderated and made comfortable for the most part by sea breezes. The thermometer frequently rises above 90 degrees, but its medium height may be stated at about 78 degrees of Fahrenheit. They are visited by periodical rains, which are often powerful, and in general the humidity of the atmosphere is very great, causing iron and other metals that are easily oxidated to be covered with rust. Hurricanes are common to most of these islands, and frequently, in their incredible fury, produce the most desolating effects wherever they extend. The productions of the West Indies are rich and varied, and constitute important articles of commerce. From the fertile soil spring the sugar cane, the coffee plant, the allspice or pimento, the nutritive banana or plantain, the pineapple, the luscious fruit of the anana, the yam, sweet potato, uca, maize, and cassava or manioc, with cocoa, tobacco, cotton, various dyewoods and stuffs, fustic, logwood, indigo, cochineal, and medicinal plants such as arrowroot, licorice root, ginger, jalap, ipecacuanha, sarsaparilla, etc. The mahogany and lignum vitae are included in the vegetable productions of this archipelago, but to this catalogue must still be added the breadfruit, coconut, mango, pawpaw, guava, orange, lemon, tamarind, fig, cashew nut, mami, grenadilla, pania, pandanut, etc. Inhabitants. The white inhabitants of the West Indies are Creoles, Spanish, English, French, Germans, etc. But the Negroes are the most numerous class, though the mixed races are quite abundant. The Indians are extinct, except as mingled with Negroes in a part of the island of St. Vincent. The general classes are those of master and slave, or were such before the Act of Emancipation took effect in the British portion of the islands. From the diversity of nations or races, several languages are necessarily in use, as the English, the French, the Spanish, with other European tongues, and the Creole, a jargon used in Haiti, composed of French and several African dialects. Political divisions. These consist of the British Islands, the Spanish Islands, the French Islands, the Dutch Islands, the Danish Islands, one Swedish island, and the independent island of Haiti. The British own 22 islands of various dimensions, the Spanish 2, that is, the large islands of Cuba and Puerto Rico, the French 6, the Dutch 4, and the single Swedish island is St. Bartholomew's. The last is a small but fertile island which was ceded to Sweden by France in 1785. 1. The British West Indies. The government of the British West Indies is modelled on the constitution of the mother country. The several islands have a governor or lieutenant governor and a legislative council appointed by the Crown, and the most of them have also a House of Representatives, chosen by the people, who legislate upon all subjects of a local character. The West Indies were formerly a great mart of that infamous traffic, the slave trade, which, according to McCulloch, was commenced by the Portuguese in 1542, and this nation seems disposed to be the last to relinquish it. By means of the noble exertions of Wilberforce, Clarkson, Sharp, and others, an act was passed in 1806 by the British Parliament for abolishing the slave trade, and the present age has witnessed another act highly honourable to the British nation for the total abolition of slavery at great expense throughout the British colonies. By this memorable act, which was passed by Parliament in 1833, the slaves were on the 1st of August 1834 made apprenticed labourers to continue such, as part of them till the 1st of August 1838, and a part till the 1st of August 1840, when they were all to become completely free. To indemnify the owners of the slaves, Parliament voted the sum of £20 millions as a compensation, payable in certain fixed proportions, according as each colony should be ascertained to have complied with the terms of the Act. Soon after the passing of this Act, the slaves in the island of Antigua and the Bermudas were made free by the colonial governments, and acts were afterwards passed by the legislatures of Barbados, Jamaica, Nevis, Montserrat, St. Christopher's, St. Vincent, and Tortola, liberating all the slaves or apprenticed labourers in those islands on the 1st of August 1838. Movements of a similar nature also, about the same time, took place in the other islands, bringing to a close the apprenticeship which had been established. A few of the more important British islands will be noticed separately in a brief manner. 1. Jamaica. This island was discovered by Columbus in his second voyage, in 1494. It was first settled by the Spaniards in 1509. A body of 70 men were sent to it by Diego Columbus, the son of the discoverer. These were bloodthirsty wretches, who made frequent assaults on the natives for the purpose of robbery or revenge. The progress of settlement was extremely slow, not more than 3,000 inhabitants, of whom half were slaves, being found on the island in 1655, when it was taken by a British force under Penn and Venables. Soon after this event, Jamaica was colonized by 3,000 soldiers, disbanded from the Parliamentary army, who were followed by about 1,500 royalists. At the period of its capture by the English, many of the slaves belonging to the Spanish settlers fled to the mountains, where they long lived in a kind of savage independence, and became troublesome to the British colonists. They have been known by the name of Maroons. In 1795 they were overcome by the English, as they descended from their fastness for the purpose of assaulting the former, and 600 of them were sent to Nova Scotia, where they were settled on locations of land provided for them by the government. Since the occupancy of the island in 1655, the English have firmly maintained their authority over it. 2. Trinidad. This is a fruitful island, producing cotton, sugar, fine tobacco, indigo, ginger, maize, and various fruits. Its area is nearly 2,000 square miles, and its population over 45,000. Its climate is unhealthy. This island was taken by Sir Walter Raleigh in 1595, and by the French in 1676. It was captured from the Spaniards in 1797, and ceded to England by the Treaty of Amiens in 1802. 3. Barbados. This island is situated on the eastern border of the West Indian archipelago. It has a large population for its size, numbering over 100,000 souls, on an area of less than 200 square miles. The climate is hot, but the air is pure and moderated by the constant trade winds, which render it salubrious in comparison with the other islands. The exports from the island are sugar, rum, ginger, cotton, aloes, etc. It is subject to tempests, which at times have occasioned great devastation and loss of life. Barbados is supposed to have been discovered by the Portuguese, and appears never to have had any aboriginal inhabitants. In 1627 some English families settled there, but without any authority from the government. It was soon afterwards supplied with a regular colony by the Earl of Carlisle. The British settlers at length brought this rich but uncultivated tract into entire subjection by the power of industry. 4. Bahamas. The Bahama or Lucayos Islands consist of about 700 very small islands extending over a large space of the archipelago on its northern border. Their soil is generally light and sandy, and productive only in a few places. The principal products are cotton, salt, turtle, fruits, mahogany, and dyewoods. The group among them called Turk's Island is famous for its salt ponds, which annually yield more than 30,000 tons of salt for the foreign market. Guanahani, or Cad Island, is celebrated as being the land which Columbus first discovered. He named it San Salvador. The Spaniards first settled on these islands, but at length abandoned them, having shipped off the natives to work in the mines in other places. They remained desolate for more than a century. In 1629 New Providence was taken possession of by the English, who remained there till 1641, when they were driven out by the Spaniards in a cruel and barbarous manner. They, however, changed owners repeatedly, till in 1783 they were confirmed to the English by treaty. For many years previous to the close of the American War, the Bahamas were the haunts of pirates, buccaneers, and freebooters. 5. St. Christopher's. This island, with Montserrat, Nevis, Antigua, and the Virgin Isles, form one government, the governor generally residing at Antigua. The interior of the country is a rugged mass of precipices and barren mountains, the loftiest rising to 3,710 feet. The island has a productive soil on the plains. St. Christopher's is said to have been the nursery of all the English and French colonies in the West Indies. It was first visited by both nations on the same day in 1625. They shared the island between them, engaging, by treaty, to observe perpetual neutrality and alliance against the Spaniards, the common enemy. The possession of a common property in the productions of the island led eventually to jealousies and contentions. Whenever war broke out between the mother countries, the colonists engaged among themselves and alternately drove each other from the plantations. But the Treaty of Utrecht confirmed the British in the possession of the whole island. 6. Bermudas. The Bermudas, or Somers Islands, consist of a cluster of small islands in the ocean opposite the coast of North Carolina, about 200 leagues distant. They number about 400, but most of them are of no importance. A few of them have numerous forests, which supply timber for shipbuilding, thus giving employment to the inhabitants in connection with navigation. The climate is healthful and pleasant, and the fields and trees are clad in perpetual green. Their population is nearly 9,000. These islands were first discovered in 1522 by Juan Bermudez, a Spaniard, who found them without inhabitants. From him they received the name by which they are generally known. They were also called Somers, from the circumstance that Sir George Somers was wrecked on them in 1609. Shortly after this event the islands were settled by the English, who have retained possession of them ever since. 7. St. Vincent. St. Vincent is a rugged and elevated island of small extent but extremely fertile and well adapted to the cultivation of sugar and indigo. This island was first colonized in 1719 by the French from Martinique. They had no small difficulty, even at that late period, in bringing the fierce Carib natives under their authority. It was obtained by the British at the peace of 1763, and though afterwards subjected to the French arms, it was in 1783 again confirmed to the British. 2. Spanish West Indies. Although Spain had the honour of first ascertaining the existence of the West Indian Islands, and enjoyed the privilege of settling and holding most of them for a time, yet they have all passed from her authority except two, Cuba and Puerto Rico. Cuba, however, is by far the largest of the group, having an extent of territory equal to nearly 1/2 of the land area of the entire archipelago. The exports of these islands consist of sugar, rum, molasses, coffee, tobacco, and cigars, with honey, hides, cotton, fruits, etc. 1. Cuba. This island, as being the largest, is in many respects the most important in the whole cluster of the islands of the American continent. During the last 50 years, a concurrence of circumstances had rendered Cuba the richest of the European colonies in any part of the globe. A more liberal and protecting policy has been adopted by the mother country. The ports of the island have been thrown open, strangers and emigrants have been encouraged to settle there, and amid the political agitations of Spain, the expulsion of the Spanish and French residents from Hispaniola, the cession of Louisiana and Florida to a foreign power, and the disasters of those who, in the continental states of America, adhered to the old country, Cuba has become a place of general refuge. Its growth and increase within the above-named period have been very great. By the census of 1831 it contained 830,000 inhabitants. The value of its exports in 1833 was nearly $14 millions, that of its imports 18 millions and a half. In 1838 the government of Spain levied a subsidy of $2,500,000 on the island to assist in defraying the expense of the Civil War. These facts denote a state of things which formerly was far from existing on this island. Cuba was discovered by Columbus in his first voyage, but he did not ascertain whether it was an island or a part of the continent. The question was not determined until some years afterwards. It was conquered by the Spaniards under Velázquez in 1511. Little progress was made in the settlement of the island till 1519, when it was found that the most convenient route between Mexico and Europe would be through the Bahama Channel, and it was desirable to possess a seaport on the passage. This led to the foundation of Havana, the harbour of which is the best in the world. Cuba has ever been a Spanish colony. 2. Puerto Rico. This island is somewhat large for one of the West Indian cluster, having 4,500 square miles. It possesses a great variety of surface, mountains, hills, and valleys. Its climate and productions are similar to those of the adjacent islands. Puerto Rico was discovered by Columbus in 1493, but the Spaniards made no attempt to settle it till 1509, when the pursuit after gold carried them thither from Hispaniola under the command of Ponce de Leon. The natives, impressed by the belief of the superior nature of the Spaniards, made no resistance, but submitted to the yoke of bondage. Subsequently they made an insurrection and massacred 100 of the invaders, but they were easily subdued as soon as the Spaniards received reinforcements from Santo Domingo. Condemned to the mines, the wretched natives all finally disappeared from among the living. This island was taken by the English towards the close of the 17th century, but they found the climate so unhealthy that they abandoned the conquest. It is now, with Cuba, under the government of the Captain General, who resides at Havana. 3. French West Indies. The French, at present, possess but few of the islands of this western main, having lost some of their most important ones as the result of oppression or warfare. Of those that remain to them, 2 are of some consequence. 1. Martinique. This island is about 50 miles long and 16 broad. It has an uneven surface and, in some instances, mountainous eminences. Sugar, coffee, cassia, cotton, indigo, cocoa, and ginger are among its principal products. This island was settled by the French in 1635, the British took it in 1794, it was restored to France in 1802, it changed hands again in 1809, but was finally restored to France in 1815. 2. Guadeloupe. This island is somewhat extensive, being 70 miles long, and 25 broad at its widest part. In many parts it has a rich soil, and among its productions are enumerated sugar, coffee, rum, ginger, cocoa, logwood, etc. It has been repeatedly captured by the British, and as often restored to France. 4. Dutch West Indies. The Dutch possess 4 islands in the West Indian group, that is, Curaçao, St. Eustatius, St. Martin, and Saba. Curaçao was first possessed by the Spaniards in 1527. It was taken by the Dutch in 1634. It is an island of 30 miles in length and 10 in breadth. Its chief productions are sugar and tobacco, but its soil is not of the best quality, and for its supply of water it is dependent on the rains. St. Eustatius is said to be one of the finest and best cultivated islands in all of the Caribbean. Its chief product is tobacco. The English captured the island in 1802, but restored it to the Dutch in 1814. 5. Danish West Indies. These islands are 3 in number, that is, St. Croix, St. John, and St. Thomas. They are all small, the largest, St. Croix, having only 80 square miles. St. John is celebrated for its fine and capacious harbour. It has a number of salt ponds. St. Croix has a salubrious climate and fertile soil. Every part of it is under the highest cultivation. The Danes first obtained possession of these islands and still retain them. 6. Independent Island, Haiti. The island of Haiti, which now forms an independent Negro republic, was formerly called Santo Domingo and Hispaniola, Santo Domingo from the name of its chief city, and which became its common appellation in Europe, Hispaniola meaning Little Spain, so called by Columbus. Haiti is its original name, and after a lapse of 300 years has been revived since the Revolution. The island belonged, the western part of it, to France, and the eastern to Spain. It is the second in size of the West India Islands, having an area of about 30,000 square miles. It is traversed by mountains in 2 chains from east to west, with several collateral branches, from which the rivers pour over the plains below. Besides the tropical fruits and vegetables which this region affords, Haiti abounds with many valuable kinds of wood. The mahogany is of superior quality, and the species of oak affords planks 60 or 70 feet long. The pine is also abundant in the mountains. The annual value of exports is about $4 millions, the principal article being coffee, with mahogany, campchi wood, cotton, tobacco, hides, cacas, tortoise shell, wax, ginger, etc. This island was discovered by Columbus in his first voyage, and became early the scene of many an adventure, as the civilized European mingled with the native Carib. In the course of about half a century, however, from the time of their settlement here, the Spaniards exterminated the whole native population, estimated at more than 2 millions. They remained undisputed masters of the island till 1630, when some English and French, who had been driven out of St. Christopher's, took refuge there, and established themselves on the northern coast. The French finally obtained a firm footing on the island, and, after many ineffectual attempts on the part of the Spanish government to expel them, were, by the Treaty of Ryswick in 1691, formally confirmed in the possession of the western half of Haiti. The French portion of the island became, at length, the far most important part of it in productiveness and wealth. The convulsions in France, in the latter part of the last century, reached to this, its distant and beautiful colony. The doctrines of liberty and independence had begun to affect the minds of the blacks, who constitute 7/8 of the population. They soon became ripe for a rebellion, which accordingly broke out in 1791 in the French portion of Haiti. On the 1st of July, 1801, the independence of this island was proclaimed, the celebrated Toussaint Louverture being at that time the leader. Toussaint died in 1803, and the command devolved upon de Salines, one of the chiefs, who was appointed governor for life, but afterwards assumed, in 1804, the title of Jacques I, Emperor of Haiti. His tyrannical reign was terminated by assassination in 1806. Christophe, the second in command, assumed the administration of affairs. In 1807 he was appointed chief magistrate for life, and in 1811 he assumed the title of King Henry I, but he found a formidable rival in Pétion, who possessed himself of the south part of the island, which was formed into a republic, of which he was, in 1816, appointed president for life. Pétion died in 1818, and was succeeded by Boyer as president for life. 2 years afterwards, the subjects of Christophe, wearied with his tyranny, revolted, and he, being deserted by his troops, shot himself. Upon this event, Boyer marched with an army to the north, and, after a feeble resistance from a portion of the royalist chiefs, was received as a deliverer by the people, and the two states became united under one republic. There was little difficulty in the undertaking, as the people, who were principally coloured, revolted against the Spanish authorities and received Boyer as their friend. The Spanish soldiers were removed from the island, and the work of emancipation was completely effected. From that period, the authority of the blacks has been extended over the whole of Haiti. In 1805, April 17th, a treaty was concluded between France and Haiti, by which the independence of the latter was acknowledged, on condition of receiving 150 millions of francs to be paid in 5 annual instalments. On the 1st of February 1838, a new treaty of peace was concluded at Port-au-Prince between this republic and the Kingdom of France. The balance due from Haiti to France was fixed at 60 millions of francs, to be paid by annual instalments from 1838 to 1863. End of section 81.
Section 82 of Great Events in the History of North and South America. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Great Events in the History of North and South America by Charles Goodrich. Constitution of the United States of America. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Article 1, Section 1. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and House of Representatives. Section 2. The House of Representatives shall be composed of members chosen every second year by the people of the several states, and the electors in each state shall have the qualifications requisite for electors of the most numerous branch of the state legislature. No person shall be a representative who shall not have attained to the age of 25 years, and been 7 years a citizen of the United States, and who shall not, when elected, be an inhabitant of that state in which he shall be chosen. Representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states which may be included within this Union, according to their respective numbers, which shall be determined by adding to the whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years, and excluding Indians not taxed, 3/5 of all other persons. The actual enumeration shall be made within 3 years after the first meeting of the Congress of the United States, and within every subsequent term of 10 years, in such manner as they shall by law direct. The number of representatives shall not exceed 1 for every 30,000, but each state shall have at least 1 representative, and until such enumeration shall be made, the state of New Hampshire shall be entitled to choose 3, Massachusetts 8, Rhode Island and Providence Plantations 1, Connecticut 5, New York 6, New Jersey 4, Pennsylvania 8, Delaware 1, Maryland 6, Virginia 10, North Carolina 5, South Carolina 5, and Georgia 3. When vacancies happen in the representation from any state, the executive authority thereof shall issue writs of election to fill such vacancies. The House of Representatives shall choose their Speaker and other officers, and shall have the sole power of impeachment. Section 3. The Senate of the United States shall be composed of 2 senators from each state, chosen by the legislature thereof for 6 years, and each senator shall have 1 vote. Immediately after they shall be assembled in consequence of the first election, they shall be divided as equally as may be into 3 classes. The seats of the senators of the first class shall be vacated at the expiration of the 2nd year, of the second class at the expiration of the 4th year, and of the third class at the expiration of the 6th year, so that 1/3 may be chosen every 2nd year, and if vacancies happen by resignation or otherwise during the recess of the legislature of any state, the executive thereof may make temporary appointments until the next meeting of the legislature, which shall then fill such vacancies. No person shall be a senator who shall not have attained to the age of 30 years, and been 9 years a citizen of the United States, and who shall not, when elected, be an inhabitant of that state for which he shall be chosen. The Vice President of the United States shall be President of the Senate, but shall have no vote unless they be equally divided. The Senate shall choose their other officers, and also a President pro tempore, in the absence of the Vice President, or when he shall exercise the office of the President of the United States. The Senate shall have the sole power to try all impeachments. When sitting for that purpose, they shall be an oath or affirmation. When the President of the United States is tried, the Chief Justice shall preside, and no person shall be convicted without the concurrence of 2/3 of the members present. Judgment in cases of impeachment shall not extend further than to removal from office and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States. But the party convicted shall nevertheless be liable and subject to indictment, trial, judgment, and punishment according to law. Section 4. The times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof, but the Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations, except as to the places of choosing senators. The Congress shall assemble at least once in every year, and such meeting shall be on the first Monday in December, unless they shall by law appoint a different day. Section 5. Each house shall be the judge of the elections, returns, and qualifications of its own members, and a majority of each shall constitute a quorum to do business. But a smaller number may adjourn from day to day, and may be authorized to compel the attendance of absent members in such manner and under such penalties as each house may provide. Each house may determine the rules of its proceedings, punish its members for disorderly behavior, and, with the concurrence of 2/3, expel a member. Each house shall keep a journal of its proceedings, and from time to time publish the same, excepting such parts as may in their judgment require secrecy, and the yeas and nays of the members of either house on any question shall, at the desire of 1/5 of those present, be entered on the journal. Neither house, during the session of Congress, shall, without the consent of the other, adjourn for more than 3 days, nor to any other place than that in which the 2 houses shall be sitting. Section 6. The senators and representatives shall receive a compensation for their services, to be ascertained by law and paid out of the Treasury of the United States. They shall in all cases, except treason, felony, and breach of the peace, be privileged from arrest during their attendance at the session of their respective houses, and in going to and returning from the same. And for any speech or debate in either house, they shall not be questioned in any other place. No senator or representative shall, during the time for which he was elected, be appointed to any civil office under the authority of the United States, which shall have been created, or the emoluments whereof shall have been increased during such time. And no person holding any office under the United States shall be a member of either house during his continuance in office. Section 7. All bills for raising revenue shall originate in the House of Representatives, but the Senate may propose or concur with amendments as on other bills. Every bill which shall have passed the House of Representatives and the Senate shall, before it become a law, be presented to the President of the United States. If he approve, he shall sign it, but if not, he shall return it, with his objections, to that House in which it shall have originated, who shall enter the objections at large on their journal, and proceed to reconsider it. If, after such reconsideration, 2/3 of that House shall agree to pass the bill, it shall be sent, together with the objections, to the other House, by which it shall likewise be reconsidered, and, if approved by 2/3 of that House, it shall become a law. But in all such cases, the votes of both Houses shall be determined by yeas and nays, and the names of the persons voting for and against the bill shall be entered on the journal of each House respectively. If any bill shall not be returned by the President within 10 days, Sundays excepted, after it shall have been presented to him, the same shall be a law, in like manner as if he had signed it, unless the Congress by their adjournment prevent its return, in which case it shall not be a law. Every order, resolution, or vote to which the concurrence of the Senate and House of Representatives may be necessary, except on a question of adjournment, shall be presented to the President of the United States, and before the same shall take effect, shall be approved by him, or, being disapproved by him, shall be repassed by 2/3 of the Senate and House of Representatives, according to the rules and limitations prescribed in the case of a bill. Section 8. The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. But all duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. To borrow money on the credit of the United States. To regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states, and with the Indian tribes. To establish an uniform rule of naturalization and uniform laws on the subject of bankruptcies throughout the United States. To coin money, regulate the value thereof and of foreign coin, and fix the standard of weights and measures. To provide for the punishment of counterfeiting the securities and current coin of the United States. To establish post offices and post roads. To promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. to constitute tribunals inferior to the Supreme Court, to define and punish piracies and felonies committed on the high seas and offenses against the law of nations, to declare war, grant letters of marque and reprisal, to make rules concerning captures on land and water, to raise and support armies, but no appropriation of money to that use shall be for a longer term than 2 years, to provide and maintain a navy, to make rules for the government and regulation of the land and naval forces, to provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions, to provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia, and for governing such part of them as may be employed in the service of the United States, reserving to the states, respectively, the appointment of the officers and the authority of training the militia according to the discipline prescribed by Congress, to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district not exceeding 10 miles square as may, by cession of particular states and the acceptance of Congress, become the seat of the government of the United States, and to exercise like authority over all places purchased by the consent of the legislature of the state in which the same shall be for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings, and to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers, and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States, or in any department or officer thereof. Section 9. The migration or importation of such persons as any of the states now existing shall think proper to admit shall not be prohibited by the Congress prior to the year 1808, but a tax or duty may be imposed on such importation, not exceeding 10,000 for each person. The privilege of the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended, unless when in cases of rebellion or invasion the public safety may require it. No bill of attainder or ex post facto law shall be passed. No capitation or other direct tax shall be laid, unless in proportion to the census or enumeration herein before directed to be taken. No tax or duty shall be laid on articles exported from any state. No preference shall be given by any regulation of commerce or revenue to the ports of one state over those of another, nor shall vessels bound to or from one state be obliged to enter, clear, or pay duties in another. No money shall be drawn from the treasury, but in consequence of appropriations made by law, and a regular statement and account of the receipts and expenditures of all public money shall be published from time to time. No title of nobility shall be granted by the United States, and no person holding any office of profit or trust under them shall, without the consent of the Congress, accept of any present, emolument, office, or title of any kind whatever from any king, prince, or foreign state. Section 10. No state shall enter into any treaty, alliance, or confederation, grant letters of marque and reprisal, coin money, emit bills of credit, make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts, pass any bill of attainder, ex post facto law, or law impairing the obligation of contracts, or grant any title of nobility. No state shall, without the consent of the Congress, lay any imposts or duties on imports or exports, except what may be absolutely necessary for executing its inspection laws, and the net produce of all duties and imposts laid by any states on imports or exports shall be for the use of the Treasury of the United States, and all such laws shall be subject to the revision and control of the Congress. No state shall, without the consent of Congress, lay any duty of tonnage, keep troops or ships of war in time of peace, enter into any agreement or compact with another state or with a foreign power, or engage in war unless actually invaded, or in such imminent danger as will not admit of delay. Article 2, Section 1. The executive power shall be vested in a President of the United States of America. He shall hold his office during the term of 4 years, and together with the Vice President, chosen for the same term, be elected as follows. Each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors, equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled in the Congress. But no senator or representative or person holding an office of trust or profit under the United States shall be appointed an elector. Note: a clause originally inserted in this place, relative to the election of President and Vice President, has been superseded and annulled by Article 12 of the amendments. End note. The Congress may determine the time of choosing the electors, and the day on which they shall give their votes, which day shall be the same throughout the United States. No person except a natural-born citizen or a citizen of the United States at the time of the adoption of this Constitution shall be eligible to the office of President. Neither shall any person be eligible to that office who shall not have attained to the age of 35 years and been 14 years a resident within the United States. In case of the removal of the President from office, or of his death, resignation, or inability to discharge the powers and duties of the said office, the same shall devolve on the Vice President, and the Congress may by law provide for the case of removal, death, resignation, or inability both of the President and Vice President, declaring what officer shall then act as President, and such officer shall act accordingly until the disability be removed or a President shall be elected. The President shall, at stated times, receive for his services a compensation which shall neither be increased nor diminished during the period for which he shall have been elected, and he shall not receive within that period any other emolument from the United States or any of them. Before he enter on the execution of his office, he shall take the following oath or affirmation. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute the office of the President of the United States, and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. Section 2. The President shall be Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States, and of the militia of the several states, when called into the actual service of the United States. He may require the opinion in writing of the principal officer in each of the executive departments upon any subject relating to the duties of their respective offices, and he shall have power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. He shall have power, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, to make treaties, provided 2/3 of the senators present concur, and he shall nominate, and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, shall appoint ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, judges of the Supreme Court, and all other officers of the United States, whose appointments are not herein otherwise provided for, and which shall be established by law. But the Congress may by law vest the appointment of such inferior officers as they think proper in the President alone, in the courts of law, or in the heads of departments. The President shall have the power to fill up all vacancies that may happen during the recess of the Senate by granting commissions which shall expire at the end of their next session. Section 3. He shall from time to time give to the Congress information of the state of the Union and recommend to their consideration such measures as he shall judge necessary and expedient. He may, on extraordinary occasions, convene both houses, or either of them, and in case of disagreement between them with respect to the time of adjournment, he may adjourn them to such time as he shall think proper. He shall receive ambassadors and other public ministers. He shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed, and shall commission all the officers of the United States. Section 4. The President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Article 3, Section 1. The judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court, and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. The judges, both of the Supreme and inferior courts, shall hold their offices during good behavior, and shall at stated times receive for their services a compensation, which shall not be diminished during their continuance in office. Section 2. The judicial power shall extend to all cases, in law and equity, arising under this Constitution, the laws of the United States, and treaties made, or which shall be made, under their authority. To all cases affecting ambassadors, other public ministers, and consuls. To all cases of admiralty and maritime jurisdiction. To controversies in which the United States shall be a party, to controversies between two or more states, between a state and citizens of another state, between citizens of different states, between citizens of the same state claiming lands under grants of different states, and between a state or citizens thereof and foreign states, citizens or subjects. In all cases affecting ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, and those in which a state shall be party, the Supreme Court shall have the original jurisdiction. In all the other cases before mentioned, the Supreme Court shall have appellate jurisdiction, both as to law and fact, with such exceptions and under such regulations as the Congress shall make. The trial of all crimes, except in cases of impeachment, shall be by jury, and such trial shall be held in the state where the said crime shall have been committed. But when not committed within any state, the trial shall be at such place or places as the Congress may by law have directed. Section 3. Treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them, or in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. No person shall be convicted of treason unless on the testimony of 2 witnesses to the same overt act, or on confession in open court. The Congress shall have the power to declare the punishment of treason, but no attainder of treason shall work corruption of blood, except during the life of the person attainted. Article 4, Section 1. Full faith and credit shall be given in each state to the public acts, records, and judicial proceedings of every other state, and the Congress may by general laws prescribe the manner in which such acts, records, and proceedings shall be proved and the effect thereof. Section 2. The citizens of each state shall be entitled to all privileges and immunities of citizens in the several states. A person charged in any state with treason, felony, or other crime, who shall flee from justice and be found in another state, shall, on demand of the executive authority of the state from which he fled, be delivered up to be removed to the state having jurisdiction of the crime. No person held to service or labor in one state under the laws thereof, escaping into another, shall, in consequence of any law or regulation therein, be discharged from such service or labor, but shall be delivered up on claim of the party to whom such service or labor may be due. Section 3. New states may be admitted by the Congress into this Union, but no new state shall be formed or erected within the jurisdiction of any other state, nor any state be formed by the junction of two or more states or parts of states without the consent of the legislatures of the states concerned as well as of the Congress. The Congress shall have the power to dispose of and make all needful rules and regulations respecting the territory or other property belonging to the United States, and nothing in this Constitution shall be so construed as to prejudice any claims of the United States or of any particular state. Section 4. The United States shall guarantee to every state in this Union a republican form of government, and shall protect each of them against invasion, and, on application of the legislature or of the executive, when the legislature cannot be convened, against domestic violence. Article 5. The Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or, on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which, in either case, shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution, when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states, or by convention in 3/4 thereof, as the one or the other mode of ratification may be proposed by the Congress, provided that no amendment which may be made prior to the year 1808 shall in any manner affect the first and fourth clauses in the 9th section of the first article, and that no state without its consent shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate. Article 6. All debts contracted and engagements entered into before the adoption of this Constitution shall be as valid against the United States under this Constitution as under the Confederation. This Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made, or which shall be made, under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. The senators and representatives before mentioned, and the members of the several state legislatures, and all executive and judicial officers, both of the United States and of the several states, shall be bound by oath or affirmation to support this Constitution, but no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. Article 7. The ratification of the Convention of 9 states shall be sufficient for the establishment of this Constitution between the states so ratifying the same. Done in convention by the unanimous consent of the states present, the 17th day of September, in the year of our Lord 1787, and of the independence of the United States of America the 12th. In witness whereof, we have hereunto subscribed our names. George Washington, President and Deputy from Virginia. New Hampshire, John Langdon, Nicholas Gilman. Massachusetts, Nathaniel Gorham, Rufus King. Connecticut, William Samuel Johnson, Roger Sherman. New York, Alexander Hamilton. New Jersey, William Livingston, David Brearley, William Patterson, Jonathan Dayton. Pennsylvania, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Mifflin, Robert Morris, George Clymer, Thomas Fitzsimmons, Jared Ingersoll, James Wilson. Gouverneur Morris. Delaware, George Reed, Gunning Bedford Jr., John Dickinson, Richard Bassett, Jacob Broom. Maryland, James McHenry, Daniel Jennifer of St. Thomas, Daniel Carroll. Virginia, John Blair, James Madison Jr. North Carolina, William Blount, Richard Dobbs Speight, Hugh Williamson. South Carolina, John Rutledge, Charles Coatsworth Pinckney, Charles Pinckney, Pierce Butler. Georgia, William Few, Abraham Baldwin. Attest, William Jackson, Secretary. End of section 82. Section 83 of Great Events in the History of North and South America. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Great Events in the History of North and South America by Charles Goodrich. Articles in addition to and amendment of the Constitution of the United States of America. Proposed by Congress and ratified by the legislatures of the several states pursuant to the 5th article of the original Constitution. Article 1. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Article 2. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Article 3. No soldier shall, in time of peace, be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. Article 4. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Article 5. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime, unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia, when in actual service in time of war or public danger. Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. Article 6. In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law, and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witnesses against him, to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. Article 7. In suits at common law, where the value in controversy shall exceed $20, the right of trial by jury shall be preserved, and no fact tried by a jury shall be otherwise re-examined in any court of the United States than according to the rules of the common law. Article 8. Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. Article 9. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. Article 10. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. Article 11. The judicial power of the United States shall not be construed to extend to any suit in law or equity commenced or prosecuted against one of the United States by citizens of another state, or by citizens or subjects of any foreign state. Article 12. The electors shall meet in their respective states and vote by ballot for President and Vice President, one of whom at least shall not be an inhabitant of the same state with themselves. They shall name in their ballots the person voted for as President, and in distinct ballots the person voted for as Vice President, and they shall make distinct lists of all persons voted for as President, and of all persons voted for as Vice President, and of the number of votes for each, which lists they shall sign and certify, and transmit sealed to the seat of government of the United States, directed to the President of the Senate. The President of the Senate shall, in presence of the Senate and House of Representatives, open all the certificates, and the votes shall then be counted. The person having the greatest number of votes for President shall be the President, if such number be a majority of the whole number of electors appointed. And if no person have such majority, then from the persons having the highest numbers, not exceeding 3 on the list of those voted for as President, the House of Representatives shall choose immediately by ballot the President. But in choosing the President, the votes shall be taken by states, the representation from each state having one vote. A quorum for this purpose shall consist of a member or members from 2/3 of the states, and a majority of the states shall be necessary to a choice. And if the House of Representatives shall not choose a President whenever the right of choice shall devolve upon them before the 4th day of March next following, then the Vice President shall act as President, as in the case of death or other constitutional disability of the President. The person having the greatest number of votes as Vice President shall be the Vice President, if such number be a majority of the whole number of electors appointed. And if no person have a majority, then from the 2 highest numbers on the list the Senate shall choose the Vice President. A quorum for the purpose shall consist of 2/3 of the whole number of senators, and a majority of the whole number shall be necessary to a choice. But no person constitutionally ineligible to the office of President shall be eligible to that of Vice President of the United States. The following is prefixed to the first 10 of the preceding amendments. Congress of the United States begun and held at the city of New York on Wednesday, the 4th of March, 1789. The conventions of a number of the states, having at the time of their adopting the Constitution expressed a desire, in order to prevent misconstruction or abuse of its powers, that further declaratory and restrictive clauses should be added, and as extending the ground of public confidence in the government will best ensure the beneficent ends of its institution. Resolved by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America, in Congress assembled, 2/3 of both houses concurring, that the following articles be proposed to the legislatures of the several states as amendments to the Constitution of the United States, all or any of which articles, when ratified by 3/4 of the said legislatures, to be valid to all intents and purposes, as part of the said Constitution, viz., articles in addition to an amendment of the Constitution of the United States of America, proposed by Congress and ratified by the legislatures of the several states pursuant to the 5th article of the original Constitution. The first 10 amendments of the Constitution were ratified by the states as follows, viz., by New Jersey, 12th November 1789, by Maryland, 19th December 1789, by North Carolina, 22nd December 1789, by South Carolina, 19th January 1790, by New Hampshire, 25th January 1790, by Delaware, 28th January 1790, by Pennsylvania, 10th March 1790, by New York, 27th March 1790, by Rhode Island, 15th June 1790, by Vermont, 3rd November 1791, by Virginia, 15 December 1791. The following is prefixed to the 11th of the preceding amendments. Third Congress of the United States. At the first session, begun and held at the city of Philadelphia in the state of Pennsylvania, on Monday, the 2nd of December, 1793. Resolved by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America, in Congress assembled, 2/3 of both houses concurring, that the following article be proposed to the legislatures of the several states as an amendment to the Constitution of the United States, which, when ratified by 3/4 of the said legislatures, shall be valid as part of the said Constitution, viz. The following is prefixed to the 12th of the preceding amendments. 8th Congress of the United States. At the first session, begun and held at the city of Washington in the territory of Columbia, on Monday the 17th of October, 1803. Resolved by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America, in Congress assembled, 2/3 of both houses concurring, that in lieu of the 3rd paragraph of the 1st section of the 2nd article of the Constitution of the United States, the following be proposed as an amendment to the Constitution of the United States, which, when ratified by 3/4 of the legislatures of the several states, shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of the said Constitution, to wit, the 10 first of the preceding amendments were proposed at the first session of the First Congress of the United States, 25th September 1789, and were finally ratified by the constitutional number of states on the 15th day of December 1791. The 11th Amendment was proposed at the first session of the Third Congress, 5th March 1794, and was declared in a message from the President of the United States to both houses of Congress, dated 8th January 1798, to have been adopted by the constitutional number of states. The 12th Amendment was proposed at the first session of the 8th Congress, 12th December 1803, and was adopted by the constitutional number of states in 1804, according to a public notice thereof by the Secretary of State, dated 25th September of the same year. The foregoing copy of the Constitution, amendments, etc., is printed from an edition which, quote, has been critically compared with the original, and found to be correct in text, letter, and punctuation," end quote, and is so certified by James Buchanan, Secretary of State. End of section 83.
Section 84 of Great Events in the History of North and South America. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Betty B. Great Events in the History of North and South America by Charles Goodrich. Declaration of Independence. When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume, among the powers of the earth, the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness; that, to secure these rights, governments are instituted among them, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed; and that, whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments, long established, should not be changed for light and transient causes; and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty, to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of the colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having, in direct object, the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has refused his assent to laws the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended in their operations till his assent should be obtained; and, when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the repository of their public records, for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing, with manly firmness, his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time after such dissolutions to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining, in the meantime, exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose obstructing the laws of naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migration thither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. He has kept among us in time of peace standing armies, without the consent of our legislatures. He has effected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases of the benefit of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies, for taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments, for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny already begun, with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages, and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens, taken captive on the high seas, to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us, and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. In every stage of these oppressions we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of the attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our emigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them, by the ties of our common kindred, to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and of consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation, and hold them, as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace friends. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that, as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. John Hancock. New Hampshire: Josiah Bartlett, William Whipple, Matthew Thornton. Massachusetts Bay: Samuel Adams, John Adams, Robert Treat Payne, Elbridge Gerry. Rhode Island: Stephen Hopkins, William Ellery. Connecticut: Roger Sherman, Samuel Huntington, William Williams, Oliver Wolcott. New York: William Floyd, Philip Livingston, Francis Lewis, Lewis Morris. New Jersey: Richard Stockton, John Witherspoon, Francis Hopkinson, John Hart, Abraham Clark. Pennsylvania: Robert Morris, Benjamin Rush, Benjamin Franklin, John Morton, George Clymer, James Smith, George Taylor, James Wilson, George Ross. Delaware: Caesar Rodney, George Reed, Thomas McKean. Maryland: Samuel Chase, William Paca, Thomas Stone, Charles Carroll of Carrollton. Virginia: George Wythe, Richard Henry Lee, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Harrison, Thomas Nelson Jr., Francis Lightfoot Lee, Carter Braxton. North Carolina: William Hooper, Joseph Hughes, John Penn. South Carolina: Edward Rutledge, Thomas Hayward Jr., Thomas Lynch Jr., Arthur Middleton. Georgia: Button Gwinnett, Lyman Hall, George Walton. End of section 84. Section 85 of Great Events in the History of North and South America. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Betty B. Great Events in the History of North and South America by Charles Goodrich. United States, Zachary Taylor, President, continued. Congress assembled on the 3rd of December, but the organization of the House of Representatives was delayed for 20 days, that period being consumed in voting for a speaker before a choice was effected. The ballotings reached the number of 63. So nearly balanced were the two great political parties that a few members, constituting the Free Soil parties, so called, had it in their power for this long time to prevent a choice, and that power they exercised with an obstinacy of purpose which excited the marvel of the nation. Nor at the last was a choice effected but by the adoption of a novel resolution, viz., that after voting viva voce 3 times, if no speaker is elected, the vote shall be called again, and the member having the highest vote, provided it be a majority of a quorum, shall be declared elected. Under this rule, the choice finally fell upon the candidate of the Democratic Party. To the people of the country, such a contest was regarded with deep regret and even with indignation. The feelings of members became excited and exasperated. Political jealousies and animosities were kindled. Sectional differences were magnified to unwonted importance, and sectional interests advocated and insisted upon, all giving premonition of the long and stormy session which followed. Fortunately, the President and Senate awaited the issue with a calm and dignified bearing, and, on the organization of the House, the former communicated his annual message. It was more brief than such documents have usually been, but clear, able, and remarkably practical. It recommended, among other matters of various moment, an alteration of the tariff, improvements in rivers and harbors, strict neutrality of the nation in foreign quarrels, and the immediate admission of California with the Constitution which she had already formed. The message concluded by urging the preservation of the Union in terms as noble in sentiment as beautiful in expression. The President said, "Attachment to the Union of the States should be habitually fostered in every American heart. For more than half a century, during which kingdoms and empires have fallen, this Union has stood unshaken. The patriots who formed it have long since descended to the grave, yet still it remains the proudest monument to their memory and the object of affection and admiration with everyone, worthy to bear the American name. In my judgment, its dissolution would be the greatest of calamities, and to avert that should be the study of every American. Upon its preservation must depend our own happiness and that of countless generations to come. Whatever dangers may threaten it, I shall stand by it and maintain it in its integrity to the full extent of the obligations imposed and the power conferred upon me by the Constitution." Proceedings in Congress. For years the subject of slavery has been, as is well known, a fruitful theme of controversy, and a source of jealousy and agitation between parties in the southern and northern states. The great territorial acquisitions of the United States, consequent upon the war with Mexico, and the question whether slavery should or should not obtain in those territories, had served to increase that jealousy and that agitation. Moreover, California had already adopted a constitution by which slavery was excluded, and was making application for admission into the Union. Other states were soon expected to follow her lead. To the South, these anti-slavery tendencies were not only unexpected, but most unwelcome, as with the hope, and probably with the design, of extending the area of slavery, they had ardently enlisted in the Mexican War. On the other hand, the people of the North generally were for preventing the further extension of slavery, and even desired to curtail the system by all constitutional measures within their power. It was in this sensitive and excited state of the country that Congress assembled. The members themselves participated more or less in these jealous and antagonistical feelings, which were rather increased than allayed by the unfortunate contest attendant upon the election of a speaker. Indeed, that a storm was approaching was too evident to be concealed. A crisis had come which must be met. Questions of the deepest importance could no longer be postponed. It was fortunate for the nation that the Senate at this time embodied men of great political sagacity and firm and patriotic resolution. Among these may be mentioned, by way of preeminence, Mr. Clay, who had once more returned to the councils of the nation, and upon whom more than any other man it seemed to devolve, to mediate between parties holding a hostile attitude, and to suggest some measures, if such were possible, by which great and daily increasing difficulties might be compromised. Accordingly, towards the close of January, Mr. Clay introduced his celebrated resolutions to the consideration of the Senate, by which, taken together, he proposed an amicable arrangement of all the questions in controversy between free and slave states, growing out of the subject of the institution of slavery. These resolutions were as follows. The first of these related to the admission of California, when she should apply, without providing for the introduction or exclusion of slavery within her boundaries. The second declared that slavery does not exist and is not likely to be introduced into the territories acquired from the Republic of Mexico, and that no legislation should be had in reference to its introduction or exclusion therefrom. The third established the western boundary in the state of Texas. The fourth provided for the payment of the public debt of the state of Texas, she relinquishing to the United States all her claims for any part of New Mexico. The fifth asserted the inexpediency of abolishing slavery in the District of Columbia, without the consent of Maryland, without the consent of the people of the district, and without just compensation to the owners of the slaves within the district. The sixth expressed the expediency of prohibiting the slave trade in the District of Columbia. The seventh related to the restitution and delivery of fugitive slaves. The eighth denied the power to Congress to prohibit or obstruct the slave trade between the slaveholding states. These resolutions were subsequently supported by Mr. Clay in a speech of great power, and in which the great pacificator stood before the Senate and the world as the firm and fast friend of the country, the whole country, in whose service, for whose prosperity, and for the preservation of whose union he had labored with untiring assiduity during the greater part of his life. In view of the dangers which were thickening around the country, and the prospect of disunion and possibly civil war growing out of these unsettled questions between the North and South, Mr. Clay, in conclusion, most eloquently said, "Sir, I implore gentlemen, I adjure them, whether from the South or the North, by all they hold dear in this world, by all their love of liberty, by all their veneration for their ancestors, by all their gratitude to Him who has bestowed on them such unnumbered and countless blessings, by all the duties which they owe to mankind, and by all the duties which they owe to themselves, to pause, solemnly to pause at the edge of the precipice, before the fatal and dangerous leap is taken into the yawning abyss below, from which none who ever take it shall return in safety. From this time for months these resolutions occupied the consideration of the Senate, speech following speech, often embodying the most profound views, exciting the deepest feelings, and giving birth oft-time to eloquence the most powerful and patriotic. Death of Mr. Calhoun. During the pendency of these great questions which were agitating the country to its remotest ends, and the discussion of which seemed to increase rather than allay the already excited storm, an event occurred calculated to show the folly of all such sectional strife, as that in which the representatives of the nation were engaged. This was the death of that able and distinguished statesman, John C. Calhoun of South Carolina, who died at Washington while a member of the Senate on the 6th of April. Among the great men of the day, few had occupied a more commanding station than he, and but few had been longer engaged in the public service of his country. As early as 1810, Mr. Calhoun took his seat in the House of Representatives of the United States. The period was pregnant with portentous events. Europe was involved in war, nor was it improbable that the United States would long escape its calamities. Mr. Calhoun felt and enforced the necessity of immediate preparation for such a state. The first tones of his voice in public life might be considered warlike, yet no man loved peace better or deemed it more likely to be secured than by being well prepared for hostilities. In subsequent years he occupied various important offices. During the administration of the younger Adams and the first term of General Jackson, he held the office of Vice President. During a part of the Tyler administration, he was Secretary of State. For many years he had a seat in the Senate. In all these stations he showed himself to be a man of preeminent talents and incorruptible integrity. He was strongly Southern in his feelings, and perhaps his sectional prejudices sometimes led him to the advocacy of some measures and opposition to others, which with other feelings he would have avoided. Yet no one could doubt his patriotism or his firmness in the cause of right, as he understood it. His speeches displayed great logical acumen and were often characterized for great power and brilliancy, which commanded the admiration of his strongest political opponents. In the great questions which were agitating the national representatives at the time of his death, Mr. Calhoun had taken the deepest possible interest. He was solemnly impressed with the critical juncture of affairs, and thought he foresaw in the measures which were likely to be adopted the precursors of a shock fatal to the integrity of the national union. Though borne down with a disease which in the sequel must prove fatal, he enlisted himself strongly, too strongly for his physical strength, to avert impending calamities, as he deemed them, and by so doing hasten the termination of his mortal existence. His departure was a national loss. Even those who had long differed from him in regard to political doctrines and political measures lamented his death. A committee of the Senate accompanied his remains to his native state, where it is believed he was held in honor and affection almost unequaled in the history of public men. The funeral obsequies of Mr. Calhoun having been solemnized, Congress resumed its deliberations, and shortly after, a resolution introduced by Mr. Foote, referring the subject matters in debate to a select committee consisting of 13, was adopted. Of this committee Mr. Clay was chairman. To this committee were referred the following subjects upon which to report. First, the admission of California as she presents herself. Second, governments for territories without any anti-slavery proviso. Third, settlement of the boundary question between Texas and New Mexico, and the purchase of the territory of Texas. Fourth, the ultimate admission of other states formed from the territory of Texas. Besides these, the committee were permitted to take into consideration, or not, at their discretion, the subject of fugitive slaves and slavery in the District of Columbia. On the 8th of May, Mr. Clay presented the majority report of the Committee of 13. denominated the Compromise or Omnibus Bill, which after a protracted discussion failed, but its provisions were subsequently passed, as we shall have occasion to notice in a subsequent page. Invasion of Cuba. On the 25th of April and the 2nd of May, an expedition, 300 in number, left New Orleans under command of General Lopez, for the secret purpose of invading Cuba. This force had been collected, armed, and officered in the United States. So secretly had the affair been conducted that neither the Spanish consuls in our larger ports nor the government of the United States had been apprised of it. The invaders consisted in part of old Mexican soldiers, some of whom were informed of the object in view, while not a few enlisted under the expectation that the expedition was bound to California. On the morning of the 19th of May, a landing was effected at Cardenas. A brief struggle ensued between the invaders and the troops, in which the latter were repulsed, the governor captured, his palace plundered, and a large quantity of public money seized. The invaders had counted upon accessions to their ranks in the Spanish army, and from the disaffected inhabitants. In this, however, they were disappointed, and Lopez re-embarked on board the steamer, and with a few of his followers made his escape to the United States, leaving the great body of his adherents to the tender mercies of the authorities of Cuba. As soon as the sailing of the expedition was known, the American executive dispatched armed vessels to prevent its landing in Cuba. In this, however, they failed. Lopez was arrested in New Orleans and held for trial. It seems that a Spanish steamer captured two vessels in the Mexican waters, laden with men whom they suspected of having intended to join the invading expedition, and took them into Havana. The release of these was peremptorily demanded by the president, and subsequently they were so released. But three, it is believed, of all who participated in the invasion were condemned, and that these three were sent to the galleys. Convention with Great Britain. This convention had reference to the Nicaragua Treaty, so called, which was ratified by the governments of the United States and Great Britain, and promulgated at Washington the 4th of July, 1850. This treaty provided for the establishment of a communication between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, by means of a ship canal, to be constructed by way of the river San Juan de Nicaragua, and either or both of the lakes of Nicaragua or Maragua to any port or place on the Pacific Ocean. Death of General Taylor. The administration of General Taylor was suddenly brought to a close on the 9th of July by his demise on the evening of that day. His illness was brief and occasioned by exposure and fatigue while attending the celebration of the 4th of July. His funeral was attended by a large military display, by the officers of government and the representatives of foreign nations, and by an immense concourse of his fellow citizens. This event was unexpected, and the more so from the well-known vigor of health always enjoyed by the president. It came upon the nation, as in the case of the death of the lamented Harrison, like the voice of an earthquake. Few could credit it, none were prepared for it, that he, who had passed through severe military duties in the swamps of Florida and on the plains of Mexico, unharmed by bullet or pestilence, should be struck down in the midst of his friends and in the high station to which his country had raised him. It was thought passing strange. In a former part of this work, we have had occasion to sketch a portion of the military service rendered by General Taylor, while in the employment of the government. We have seen with what courage, skill, and bravery he bore himself at Palo Alto, Buena Vista, and on other fields, where victories were achieved which would have done credit to a Napoleon or a Wellington. During his entire military life, in the midst of his most brilliant victories, in the flush of all his military prosperity, he seems to have maintained an unaffected simplicity of character, a remarkable plainness of manners, an unbending integrity of soul, combined with kindness, moderation, and benevolence, calculated to win the admiration and confidence of all to whom he stood related. Returning, laurel-crowned and victorious, from a foreign war, As a writer remarks, he was hailed from his first landing on his native strand as the future president. With what unaffected modesty he received these new honors! How scrupulously he abstained from any and every step that might look like seeking this high office! How calmly and how simply, when installed as president, he bore his honors, we need not attempt to recite. From the day of his inauguration to the day of his death, it is believed that he endeavored, as he expressed himself on his dying pillow, to do his duty. No one, perhaps, ever suspected him of pursuing any crooked path in politics, or having been actuated by sinister views and purposes. His administration was brief, only 1 year and 4 months, too brief to decide upon the policy which he might have deemed it his duty to pursue in the difficult and trying times upon which the government had fallen, and amidst the perplexing questions which it was called to decide. It was fortunate for his reputation, perhaps, that he was removed at the precise juncture at which God called him to resign his exalted station. He had committed no error. He stood before the nation and the world as the man of integrity, brilliant in his former military exploits, firm and patriotic in his brief civil career. He enjoyed the confidence of friends. He commanded the respect and admiration of political opponents. He died mourned and lamented by all. To what higher honors could a man wish to attain? What reputation more exalted or more enviable could he wish to leave behind him? Fortunate Senex. End of section 85. Section 86 of Great Events in the History of North and South America. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Betty B. Great Events in the History of North and South America by Charles Goodrich. United States. 18. Millard Fillmore, President. Assumed the government July 10, 1850. Immediately upon the death of President Taylor, the members of his cabinet tendered their resignation to President Fillmore, but at his request and for the safety of the public service, they retained their offices for a few days. On the 15th, the new cabinet was formed. Daniel Webster, Massachusetts, July 15th, Secretary of State. Thomas Corwin, Ohio, July 15th, Secretary of Treasury. Alexander H. H. Stewart, Secretary of the Interior. Charles M. Conrad, Secretary of War. William A. Graham, North Carolina, July 15th, Secretary of the Navy. John J. Crittenden, Kentucky, July 15th, Attorney General. Nathan K. Hall, New York, July 15th, Postmaster General. It is a most admirable feature of the Constitution of the United States that it provides, in case of the death of a president, for the ready and quiet transfer of all his powers to the vice president as his constitutional successor. And a most interesting hour was that when, on the day following the death of General Taylor, and while his remains were still reposing in the National Mansion, Mr. Fillmore took the oath of the presidential office in the presence of both houses of Congress. It was a service occupying but a brief space, but in that short time a transfer of all executive power was quietly effected, and the machinery of government, which had paused for only a few hours, if it may be said to have been suspended at all, was again in motion, and was proceeding with its accustomed regularity and harmonious action. How unlike to scenes in other nations of the world, where the demise of a sovereign is nearly sure to be followed by turmoil and confusion, and the transfer of his power is effected only, perhaps, by strife and bloodshed. But here, at the bidding of God, the president 1 hour puts off the mantle of his power and authority, and the next his successor assumes it, and not one wave of commotion is observed. Who will not say of such a constitution, Esto perpetua? The Compromise Bill. The death of General Taylor and the funeral obsequies consequent thereupon suspended for a brief time all other congressional proceedings of the National Council. When at length action was resumed, it was natural to expect that an event so providential and so monitory would have its due influence in mitigating the acerbity of party spirit, and of infusing into the minds of legislators a deeper sense of the importance of harmony and mutual kindness. But it proved otherwise. Scarcely had the grave closed upon the remains of the great and good man, ere the same heated contest was renewed and the same sectional jealousies indulged. It would impart no pleasure to enter into the details of the Senate's action, day after day, upon the compromise bill, the one great measure which had absorbed its dissensions nearly the whole of the session. Suffice it to say that in consequence of various amendments, the bill at length contained nothing but the sections relating to the territory of Utah, and in that shape it was passed by a vote of 32 to 18. Thus a series of measures which had been under discussion for months, which the powerful eloquence of Clay, Cass, and others had advocated, and which by them and others was deemed almost essential to the peace and integrity of the Union, was lost, and for the time any adequate substitute seemed hopeless. Clouds of deeper intensity than ever seemed to be gathering, and anarchy and discord were ready to extend their baleful influence to the nation at large. Happily, however, a conservative spirit at length prevailed. Men perceived the necessity of doing something to save the nation and the Union, and under this conviction a movement was made to revive, in another form and in distinct bills, the measures which had been previously combined into one and been lost. We shall attempt to state little more than results. First, the bill for the admission of California was taken up, and after a warm discussion, during which amendment after amendment was offered and rejected, it was passed by the Senate 34 to 18. To this bill a formal and spirited protest was presented by several Southern senators, but its registration on the journal was refused. Next followed a bill making proposals to Texas for the settlement of her western boundary, and proposing to pay her $10 millions, provided she should relinquish all claim to the United States for territory beyond the boundaries prescribed. The bill was debated for several days, and on the 9th of September received its final passage, yeas 30, nays 20. On the 14th, the bill providing for a territorial government for New Mexico was taken up and finally passed. The above several bills were sent, of course, to the House of Representatives, and by that body were passed with amendments with regard to some of them, but only after as warm and even heated debate as was ever, perhaps, known on the floor of Congress. Two other important bills received also the sanction of a majority of both houses. The first was a bill to facilitate the recovery of fugitive slaves, and the second, a bill abolishing the slave trade in the District of Columbia. Congress adjourned on the 30th of September, the session having been protracted to the long period of 10 months, and having proved more stormy than any other session since the adoption of the federal Constitution. The effects of the above measures time only can determine. While to the South, the abolition of the slave trade in the District of Columbia is most obnoxious, being, as is affirmed, a precursor of further action by the general government in relation to the abolition of slavery. The Fugitive Slave Bill has received the loud and decided condemnation of individuals and assemblies at the North. The opinion, however, of the Attorney General that this latter bill does not suspend the writ of habeas corpus has served in a measure to allay the widespread hostility to it, as such suspension was supposed to be contemplated by it and was condemned as unconstitutional and unjust. End of section 86. End of Great Events in the History of North and South America by Charles Goodrich.